So thanks for joining, guys. I'm Andy Ringsell. For the people that don't know who I am, I'm official title Director of Managed Services here at DuoCall. Part of our mission as an MSP is to provide you with information on what's going on in the market space with cyber, which is one of our product sets and one of our pillars of account management. One of our partners in this cyber puzzle, I suppose, is SonicWall. We partner with them for all of our on-prem and cloud firewalls. And David, who's on the call with us today, is our account manager. They complete a twice yearly assessment of the marketplace where we're seeing threats and what the landscape looks like for not just SonicWall, but other providers in that space. And really, these are informative sessions just to give you information to put into your own business, lead decisions in your own business. And if you want any help or support with that, you can come to us. Obviously, everybody knows that we do more than just MSP. We do phone systems and a load of other things. So this is really just no hard sell, information, landscape assessment, and hopefully you'll learn something from it and take it away and be able to protect yourselves better in your own businesses. So I will hand over to David. What we're going to do is, if you have a question that you want to ask about a particular slide or anything, then feel free to put your hand up and we'll unmute you so you can ask it. If you're not comfortable doing that in front of a group of people that you don't know or never met before, please feel free to chuck it into the chat and we'll answer those questions at the end. Alternatively, reach out to myself or anybody at DuoCall, and they can get the questions answered by myself or David or one of the team.
Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, as Andrew mentioned, my name is David Meredith. I'm the territory manager here for the north of the UK with SonicWall, and I've supported DuoCall for the last few years as their kind of direct contact for SonicWall. I've been with SonicWall for about 7 years now, and prior to that, I was working for a similar company, doing a similar job with similar technology. So over 10 years, been in and around the kind of cybersecurity space. What we're coming here to talk to you about today is the SonicWall mid-year cyber threat report. And as Andrew mentioned, this is very much a state of the threat landscape kind of update. So as you'll kind of see through the slides, you'll get an idea of the kind of scale of SonicWall, but ultimately the data that we capture, and then what that data tells us, and obviously where the threats are coming from, what types of trends we're seeing, and hopefully that will give you some insight into how you can continue to kind of protect yourselves and evolve how you identify threats and protect yourself against threats. The first slide is a slide from my CEO, a chap called Bob Van Kirk. I'm not going to read all this out. In summary, it's basically what we're using that threat report for. So that data that we capture allows us to get a better understanding of what the criminal behaviour is from cyber criminals, and ultimately that'll help shape SonicWall's countermeasures, so how we can then develop products and services and support our customers and partners to make sure that they're stronger and they defend better against those malicious activities. And then just to give you an idea as to what's happening here, so this is what we call the SonicWall Capture Labs threat network. So these are millions of sensors that are scattered all across the world. Most of them are live SonicWall products and services that are recording data, recording threats. There's some what we call honeypots, where they're designed to appeal and attract threats. So they're where we're identifying the kind of latest and potentially most hazardous kind of threats that are out there. But just gives you an idea of the scale. All of those sensors across the world are actively recording threats and protecting against threats, and that's where that data comes from. And then just to give you a bit of a kind of summary to kick things off, this is where we start to get into the facts and the figures. There's lots of graphs and percentages and things like that. But ultimately, what we found over the last 6 months, and obviously when we track that against the trends we've seen in previous years, you're looking at 50 hours worth of critical attacks that are being identified in a 40-hour work week. So within that 40-hour work week period, there's an additional 10 hours worth of threats that we're detecting. So yeah, you're on average, a typical firewall is under attack 125% of the time during that 40-hour work week. So ultimately what we're looking at there is just volume, and it coming from multiple locations. It's not always coming from one person or one organization, one country. It's happening constantly nowadays, and most firewalls are protecting you against that. So you may not see that as much, but that's the type of data that we're recording in this scenario. And then you're looking at the organizations that were saved from a potential 46-day downtime in the first 5 months of 2024. So that's the kind of volume of days that would typically be out of business for, out of action for, and that's the type of that period of time that we're expecting to can be impacted by these types of threats. And then probably one of the scariest facts and stats here is, at a minimum, 12.6% of the revenues are exposed to cyber threats without proper protection. So if you're looking at a $10 million company, that's $1.2 million worth of revenue that's exposed through cyber criminals and threats like this. Now we're going to kind of jump into some specific threats and some that you'll probably be aware of. Some you may not, but we'll kind of give you some context around that as we go through. But that's kind of the headline that we've taken from the latest threat report data. And then when we drill into that, when we look at what's rising threats, where we're seeing increases and decreases, ransomware tends to be the one that we talk about a lot. It's very public, very publicized. It's usually the one that hits the press most, and it is on the rise globally, which sounds like it's a really bad news thing. But when we look at, in North America, it's 15%. In Latin and South America, it's 51% increase. But within EMEA, it's actually decreased by 49%. So it's good news for us within Europe and the UK. And I think that the main cause of that is the fact that we are starting to become better at cybersecurity. We've got organisations like DuoCall that are supporting us. Law enforcement has an impact there as well, the implications and interventions they're having. So it's been fairly positive for the UK and Europe of late when it comes to ransomware. That's not typically what I'm talking about. If I'm honest, when I've done these types of things in the past, it's usually quite bad news, a lot of doom and gloom. But in ransomware, it is actually quite a positive thing for us at the minute. That doesn't ring true when we talk about malware in general, because we have seen that increase by 30%, and that was in the last 5 months or so. So it does feel like malware is on the rise and ransomware is decreasing a little bit. And also when we're looking at that malware and that malicious software that's coming through, we're seeing a 15% of that is actually being delivered by software packages. Now that MITRE TTP, that's pretty much the methodology, if you like, or a framework that's used to measure how threats are delivered. And having it being delivered by software packing, it is increasing. It is an area where maybe downloading something you shouldn't, maybe installing something you shouldn't, whether that be an app or something on your desktop. There is, we've identified threats being deployed by that methodology, and that's increased by 15% of late. I'll keep going with the bad news. So, rising threats. So, we talked about some of this a little bit at the start, but when we talk about IoT malware, so that's Internet of Things. That's typically devices that are connected to the internet, but are relatively small, often overlooked devices. We are seeing an increase in the volume of threats that are being identified that are getting onto your network via that method. And we're looking at 52.8 hours worth of devices being under attack within that scenario. Now, we've had a few of these in the past. There's quite a well-known one that happened over in the US with the large Target, which is similar to Walmart or Asda over here. They had an air conditioning machine. It was controlled by a remote application. An engineer went in to fix something, plugged in a USB device. It managed to get malware onto that and held them to ransom for a period. But that was all from somebody trying to fix something that had something on a USB stick. But nowadays we're looking at anything that you've got where it's internet facing. If it's not protected, not surrounded by a perimeter firewall, or not patched properly and kept up to date, they're often seen as backdoors within your organization. Encrypted threats is another one that seems to increase year on year. I don't think I've ever seen encrypted threats decrease. Ultimately, this is where you're browsing out on your laptop, on your iPad, desktop, whatever it might be. You're on Google, you go and ask for something, you're going to try and find some information from a web page. Typically, that content is delivered to you via a TLS encrypted connection. So that's when you've got your padlock on the URL bar at the top. You would assume that that's a secure connection, but there's a huge increase in the volume of threats that are being delivered via that connection. And that seems to increase year on year. Ultimately, where you're going to get the data from, you don't know where it resides, you don't know the state of that environment that it's kept in, and cyber criminals are starting and increasing to include malicious content within that activity. And then finally on this page, we're looking at SOC. So when you're looking at SOC, we're looking at 83% of customers who've received alerts from managed service teams are typically related to cloud applications or compromised credentials. So that's kind of drilling down into the areas in which we're seeing the most issues when you've got some form of external monitoring. So if somebody's managing your alerts, managing your infrastructure, 83% of the alerts that they're receiving are from cloud apps and compromised credentials. So again, that's an area where we're seeing an increase in what cyber criminals are looking for. Typically, they're going for the low-hanging fruit. They're going for the things that are easiest to do, but have the maximum impact or maximum reward. And it looks like cloud applications and compromised credentials seems to be that area at the moment. And then continue a little bit onto this. This is where it gets a little bit more technical, and this is as technical as I go. We're talking about real-time deep memory inspection. That's RTDMI. Don't really need to know what that means. Ultimately, it's a sandbox environment where we are identifying threats. This is the area of SonicWall that identifies threats that have never been seen before. So lots of the malware we see, lots of the threats that we pick up on this type of data are things that we've identified previously. It's kind of nature of the course. You're not going to typically be targeted. Sometimes it happens, but it's very rare. By one person or one organization spear phishing yourself and just trying to get your organization. Usually it's thousands and millions of different forms of malware that have been thrown out, and it's far and wide to try and get the biggest impact. What this part of our technology does is actually identify the stuff that's never been seen before. These are the ones that typically are most evasive and have the potential to cause the most impact. And the fact that we're seeing that increase, 526 new variants on a daily basis, 78,923 new variants that have been identified. It kind of leans into maybe the impact of AI within threats, the fact that malware and malicious activity can be created a bit quicker, a bit easier. So yeah, that's a bit of a concern, but again, having an infrastructure in place that can protect against not just known but unknown threats is becoming more and more important. And then cryptojacking, we had a record-breaking year with this last year, but it has decreased. So it's gone down by 60%. So again, I think that kind of leans into the fact that it's now more popular, more known as a potential threat, and people are doing more about it to stop. Ultimately, cryptojacking is where cybercriminals are trying to hijack your infrastructure. They're not necessarily in there to deliver malware or to hold you to ransom, but they're more looking to steal resource, so steal processing power and things like that. And then they'll farm all that processing power together and then go hunting for cryptocurrency. So it might not really impact your infrastructure that much, other than you're going to see a heavier load on hardware or within cloud environments. Within a cloud infrastructure is a bit more of a problem, because typically, if you're within Azure, for example, and you're not restricting the amount of throughput you're allocating, and they go in and start to increase the throughput that they want to try and increase the resource they have access to, you're going to have to pay for the rent of that resource ultimately. But yeah, it's on the decrease, so it's it's definitely something that's not maintained itself as a substantial problem.
And these decreases are all down to the good work that our customers, MSPs, everybody over the world is becoming more cyber aware. So we're all utilizing different layers of technology to protect everybody in different countries. So it's good to see some downward trends rather than just scary stats all through the slide deck.
It's not all doom and gloom. I think that's the thing with these types of kind of reports that we put together. We're trying to provide a fairly transparent trend document to help inform you as to what we're seeing in the wild. So it's not always bad news. We kind of look at the things that have the potential to cause the most damage, the most impact, but also some success stories like ransomware in the UK, for example. That is definitely something that's been impacted by knowledge, by people understanding it, being aware of it, and ultimately getting themselves prepared better. Because typically it's not a matter of if it happens, it's more when it's going to happen. And if you're in a better position to stop it from happening. And then there's the kind of aftermath of that, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, not all doom and gloom. And I think this is something as well when we look at how we do business nowadays, organizations and supply chain that we have, myself included with DuoCall, and DuoCall are purchasing from SonicWall. There's other things involved in that supply chain, but having an understanding as to how you work with other organizations and the potential threats that you can be impacted and exposed to when there's multiple kind of links in that chain. I think we've kind of seen that, how interconnected organizations are and the speed in which we want to do business, and the growth of connectivity and how we always need to be online, everywhere, anywhere, at all times. We've seen quite a lot of threats being delivered through that kind of supply chain. You can see the top ones here. And yeah, a lot of these have been around for a while as well. So not like the Heartbleed one, for example, that's been available and well known to most for over 5 years. So it's things like being aware that it's not just you and your customer. There's other people involved in that. And again, being aware of the bigger picture and the wider impact can impact you. Hackers take aim. So this is something we've not always done, but it seemed to hit the press quite a bit over the last year or so. I'm just talking about Microsoft here. There's a slide on some other things in a second. But this is where you're looking at patching your infrastructure. So when Microsoft, especially one of the biggest organizations out there, when they identify a potential threat, potential vulnerability in their infrastructure and their software services, they'll patch it very, very quickly. Usually they're quite quick in getting an update out. If that update isn't kind of deployed and implemented, it's now a known vulnerability out there in the wild for cybercriminals to take advantage of. And these were the top ones that we saw being exploited from a Microsoft vulnerability perspective. And some of them are quite bad. So the security feature bypass one was probably one that jumped out at me. So the ability to get into your infrastructure potentially by bypassing security elements. So it just kind of lends itself to, if there is a patch, if there is an update, probably some kind of security enhancements that are in there as well. And then this is kind of leaning into that a bit further, in that we've seen Android devices, for example, they're being more and more targeted by threat actors, particularly what we call remote access Trojans. So they're trying to access or disguise themselves as a legitimate application, maybe even using the same graphics. You might see it's a Netflix, it's got the same Netflix logo on it. You download that application, you put your credentials in there. It's stealing those credentials and it's then using those credentials elsewhere. So it's, again, methodology and process to try and bypass multi-factor authentication, not necessarily using facial recognition on your phone, just using passwords. So it's being able to kind of bypass that part to get into your device, and then from there use that to get elsewhere. Maybe it's into your banking application or into your work emails or something like that. So it's not just tied to laptops, desktops, servers. There's lots of additional threats that are being identified, especially through Android devices as well at the moment. And this was one that really kind of caught my eye around phishing. So phishing is when you're using, something to entice somebody to do something. So it might be an email, click this link, fill out this form. A new form of that started to kind of raise its head over the past year or so around QR codes. So it's called quishing. And ultimately what they're doing is making a QR code look legitimate, similar to what they do in an email. Traditionally, you scan that QR code with your phone. It takes you to a website that tries to capture that information. It looks legit, looks like a real website, but it has seen a significant increase. I think it's gone up by almost 12% as the volume of quishing that we've seen in the last 6 months alone. So it's just another form of cyber criminals using modern trends, modern technology to try and use that as a way in and use that as a low-hanging fruit to get into your infrastructure and cause harm. But not all kind of stats and figures. There's some kind of insights and hopefully things that you can take away from today that you can put into practice, either independently with the support of DuoCall or ourselves. There's lots of things here we can't get away with. Human error is always going to be included in that as a challenge. Education, teaching people, making sure that they're aware, and cybersecurity awareness is part of an ongoing kind of trend to educate and keep people informed. Making sure what you have from a security solution perspective is configured to the best possible practices. So if there's functionality and features available, let's use them. Let's get them set to best practices. The argument against blocking and alerting, I think alerting is, knowing about something is great, but if you're not stopping it from happening, there's two parts to that. If you alert yourself that there's a potential threat, something's going on, who's managing that alert? And you've got thousands of alerts happening, and you've got alert fatigue, and you don't know how to prioritize that potentially. If there is an argument to maybe block and then allow, so stop it from happening and then do that kind of alert and investigation part potentially. And then procrastinated patching. I think we talked about this already briefly. But just being aware, having some form of patching plan in place, maybe working with managed service providers like DuoCall to assist in that, so they're able to identify a patch and roll it out as part of that deliverable for you. And then default configurations is always something that you get an iPhone nowadays, you don't really make many changes with that. You download what you want, you update your emails, your favorite apps and what have you. It's not too much of a bad scenario in that instance, but if you're looking at a firewall or a server or cloud infrastructure, it will come with default configurations, but often they're not designed to deliver the optimum performance. And every organization is slightly different in what they're wanting to achieve. So taking the time to tune it and make sure you're getting the best out of that infrastructure. And then just a few moments on some best practices. So patching we've talked about, multi-factor authentication is a must. I think at a minimum nowadays, we need to have some form of multi-factor authentication. It's not just about putting a password in. You need to prove who you are. You can even go a step further and have constant authentication, so there's zero trust involved in that. Augmented cloud security, so as you've got more infrastructure within a cloud infrastructure, more and less on-prem or a more hybrid approach, make sure there's a constant security kind of policy and procedure around that. Goes without saying, but monitoring and incident response, identifying something happening is really, really key, and ultimately having a plan in place should something happen. What are you going to do? I have a few customers of mine that kind of implement similar to like a fire drill. It's not going to happen every week, obviously, but maybe once a month, once a quarter, even once a year. Pretend like something's happened. Have a drill as to we've been hit by ransomware. What do we do? What's the next steps? And that documentation to back that up. Network segmentation is not necessarily something everybody needs to do, but it's not a bad idea. Divide your network into smaller, more secure segments. Limit the impact. Stop things from getting from one place to another, and then ongoing training. Things change constantly. In our industry especially, the threats that are going to cause the biggest problems we probably don't even know about yet. They'll come down the line. We'll figure out how to protect them, and then there'll be something else new. And we're constantly playing catch up, constantly learning and evolving. And obviously that impacts all organizations and all industries that we operate in. So just having the mindset of being open to learn things new, being open to change direction, and totally depend upon what's most important to you and what's happening from a cybersecurity perspective. Hopefully that was useful. You got something from it. We have a much larger document that kind of goes through, I think it's a 25-page document that's readily available. DuoCall can send that out as part of a follow-on of this session. But yeah, if you have questions, if there's anything on there you want to know a little bit more about, I'd be happy to kind of go through that now.
Thanks, David. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, then feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and ask David. I think there's some good stats there in what we're seeing in the marketplace. Certainly good that we're seeing some decreases in some of the things that have been fairly high over the last few years. And then obviously, basic things of 2FA and things like that, just to make sure that you are taking that first step to protect your own businesses is key really across the board. So yeah, nobody's asked any questions. So what we'll do is we'll send this out to you guys along with the information pack. And And then if you've got any questions, then feel free to come back to us, and we'll do this again in 6 months' time. So thanks for your time, David. Thanks for your time,
No problem
everybody.
at all. Thanks, everybody.
And we'll see you all soon.
Cheers. Take care.
Thank you.